of 5 remote sensing webinars that we've held this week. Today we're taking a deeper dive to show you the individual trees in a landscape across urban, forested and rural landscapes. Jan Schindler is a remote sensing data scientist who puts images and algorithms together to help us better understand the environment. I'll be back at the end for Q&A, but over to you now, Jan.
Thank you very much, Christine. So this talk summarizes our research over the last few years in tree detection and crown segmentation using remote sensing imagery. And in this, trees obviously play a key role in both urban and natural ecosystems. They provide many benefits, and there's a clear need for always better tools for mapping, modeling, and managing individual trees in the different environments. So in this talk, I will walk you through some of our key methods, and starting with the more traditional LiDAR-based approach that we take, and then also explaining a bit more about the key methods in artificial intelligence that can be applied to tree crown segmentation. I will then describe the general deep learning workflow that we set up and present to you 3 case studies, one in the urban, one in rural, and one in native forest environments. So through the Advanced Remote Sensing program led by John Diamond, we improved and developed a sort of region growing algorithm that is able to detect and segment individual tree crowns from aerial LiDAR data. And if you're not familiar with LiDAR, it's basically a technique that is able to measure the height of objects and through sending out laser pulses from a sensor that is usually flown here, over regions from a plane. And what you get out of this is basically a 3-dimensional point cloud looking like this. And if you now want to detect individual trees in this landscape, you have to go through a sort of bit of an involved process of height normalizing the point cloud, and then rasterizing the upper surface of that point cloud, which is in vegetated areas is also called the canopy height model. So this is what you can see here now. In the red areas, you have taller trees. In the yellow areas, you have shorter vegetation. Now, our algorithm is able to segment this image into objects, which in this case are tree crown objects. And then you can use these objects as input to your analysis. And we've used it for region-wide analysis, species detection work, and also landslide risk modeling in the past. Simply speaking, this algorithm is really simple. It's very commonly used elsewhere. It's basically, it starts off by identifying the tree top locations and then grows a crown polygon around that initial seed position to generate those tree crowns. What you can do with these polygons is you can overlay them over the original point cloud to extract the points belonging to each individual tree, and you can run more detailed analysis on and calculate volume, for instance, for individual trees. Now we've applied this to numerous studies. One of them is shown here. Here we counted all the tall trees in different indigenous forest types in Greater Wellington. We published a paper on this and the method a while back. So please, if you want to know more about the algorithm or the study, have a look at the paper. Now, over the last few years, there were quite a lot of developments in the space of AI and deep learning, and you've heard probably lots about it. So the underlying premise basically for us is that we can hopefully use these techniques on pure RGB true color aerial imagery, which is widely available in New Zealand. So there's no LiDAR required. And hopefully we can also get out of this technique finer details of crown polygons and a better detection rate. Most of the research that we do in this space within Manaki Whenua comes through catalyst funding from MB, and we lead a wider New Zealand-Singapore data science program collaboration on AI tree research, which is a collaboration between 5 institutes, University of Canterbury, Victoria University of Wellington, Sion, and IHPC and Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. If you want to know more about this project and what we do, please check out our project website. So you've probably seen a lot of images like this coming from Google, Microsoft, Facebook. You can basically identify objects in images using AI these days, and what it does, it creates bounding boxes and also attaches a certainty score to them. So a very popular method was proposed in 2014, which is called a region-based convolutional neural network. And what it essentially does, it extracts region proposals from a given image for type of objects that it was trained on, and it is able to classify those regions and attach those certainty scores to it. Then they kept improving this technique over the time. They called it fast RCNN and then faster RCNN. So they extended it even further, that you are not just able to identify objects, but also actually label all the pixels belonging to each individual object, which is called instant segmentation. A very popular implementation of this technique is called mask region-based convolutional network. And this basically adds a third layer to this model of classifying individual pixels belonging to each object. This works really well. However, for live streams, video footage, or other moving pictures, usually other techniques are used that are much faster. One of them being a model called YOLO, you only log once. So it is able to create those bounding boxes plus confidence scores and a class probability map almost in one go. So it's much faster and can be used for real-time applications. And that's also the type of model that was mentioned by Brent Martin on Wednesday for detecting predator species. So if you want to know more about all the different kind of AI technologies with regard to individual tree crown segmentation, I would like to refer you to a recent publication from a PhD student, Joe, who's supervised by Justin Morgenroth at the University of Canterbury, Grant Pierce from Sion, and myself. And he put together a really good review of the current state. And I recommend having a read. On the left-hand side, I also put up a few publications that were prepared by the Victoria University of Wellington together, in collaboration with us, which is more about more fundamental AI technologies, which is called genetic programming. So our deep learning workflow that we've developed within Manaki Whenua is able to integrate all these different AI technologies and can apply them to our type of imagery that we work with. So the input to those models can be a high resolution aerial photo, it can be a remotely sensed image from a satellite, it can also be a canopy height model, a surface elevation model, or any kind of raster-based image. The most important thing for all of these models is basically accurate training data. So, and I would argue it's almost more important than the model itself these days, because the models are really good and it almost doesn't matter for lots of applications which one you choose. It's really important that you collect appropriate training data and make good decisions about how you label this. So this is a key step. In the next stage, you basically have to rasterize the image into smaller chunks so that you can feed it into the neural network. Then comes the training stage. You let it run on a GPU over several hours or several days. And we do that usually on the NESI high performance compute facility. And then we can run our accuracy assessments and run a prediction. What that looks like in terms of aerial imagery in an urban setting, what we can do is we can classify individual land cover in urban areas, for instance, by looking at 10 centimeter imagery. We can map out all the buildings, all the tree canopies, and also the ground. The training labels that I've used here for this experiment came from a LiDAR classification. So it was quite straightforward task, and I think these types of things you will see quite common, quite often. So the other sort of experiment I would like to show you in the urban space is mapping individual tree crowns in Wellington City. And here, this is a typical aerial image that is available for almost all of the New Zealand cities at 10 centimeters. Oh, sorry. And the prediction here was done using a model called mask RCNN. It is able to deliver high quality polygons. What is interesting to note here is that the model prediction worked really fast and is able to, and the storage of the results is actually slower because the polygons are at such a fine detail. So it produces very large files. What you can do is reduce it down to the actual bounding box of these objects, which will be a lot faster and lead to a smaller file size. But it doesn't really look very attractive and not realistic. But what you can do is just store the circular shapes of those object detections, which is also very fast. But for very large applications in mapping entire cities or regions or at a national scale, what I would recommend is just storing the individual point, the centroid points of those object detections. It will be very fast and produce very small files. And you can encode all the tree crown parameters into the actual attribute table. So we've applied this to entire Wellington and counted near to 1.8 million trees in the urban extent. And again, what we can do is we can overlay these polygons over the LiDAR point cloud, extract individual trees, and calculate more accurate or more detailed statistics for individual trees. So we developed a interactive tree map or tree explorer for Wellington City that is available under w3.landcareresearch.co.nz. And here I would like to thank Taranaki Whanui for their support and also the Wellington City Council. And you can go on this website and basically click on individual trees and get their parameters like the mean diameter or the tree height. Moving on to the native forest case study. So we've trained out most of our models in urban spaces, but also included some training in rural areas, but without native forest. So we were quite interested to see whether our models can actually also predict individual trees in native forest areas. So here we look at one area in the Orongo Valley, and we ran our predictions for the study area. And again, I have to stress the fact that this model has never seen an area of a native forest, but is able to detect all the individual tree crowns that are visible in this 30 centimeter image. So this type of image is available for lots of regions in New Zealand. So we were interested to see, so if you keep zooming in, of course, you will find mistakes and false predictions, or that it missed a few trees. That's just due to the fact that that's a scale problem. If you use lower resolution imagery, you won't detect smaller trees at the finer scale. So for this area, we also have 2 centimeter drone imagery. So we collected or generated more manual training labels for this particular study region. We retrained our model and applied it to this area. So what you can get now is a very fine resolution estimate of all the individual tree crowns in this area. And I think that's a very promising result. But of course, if you again keep zooming in at a different scale and actually stand in the forest, you will notice that this algorithm is not able to detect all the trees just due to the fact that this is top view imagery and cannot see through the upper canopy. So the last case study I would like to present is tree species mapping in pastoral hill country. So this is a collaboration with the team from the Smarter Targeting for Erosion Control program. And Raphael and Falco, they prepared a paper which compares two landslide susceptibility models at the scale of individual trees. And this paper was recently submitted to a journal, but the preprint is already available online. So feel free to have a look at that paper if you want to know more. And in this paper, the two study areas are two farms in Wairarapa, which are very prone to landslides. So we wanted, or Raphael and Falco wanted to test two models to find out what the effect of individual trees is on landslide risk. So in order to run these landslide models, you need lots of different kind of input data sets. One of them could be information about the vegetation types and individual tree types or individual trees. But at a region to national scale, you the best estimate you get is probably from the land cover database, which includes different vegetation types. And you will notice that the scale is a bit different. So it doesn't have the fine detail of all the different tree stands and individual trees. So our task here was to map all the individual trees and to classify also individual species. So that's what we've done. We've applied a mass Gaussian model, detected all the trees in one stage, and then applied a different model, which is a encoder decoder type network called UNet, to do the actual tree species classification. We intersected the two outputs of these models and then produced a map like this that maps out all the individual trees plus species information. So this information can now be used as input to those models. And this is one example output. So on the upper panels, you see the landslide risk without any trees. And in the bottom panels, you see the updated landslide risk by adding trees and their tree species and their effect on the surrounding slope stability. So this is quite interesting piece of work. And if you want to know more about it, please have a look at the paper. So that's everything I wanted to show you today. So what's next? We continue our work in various projects on tree species mapping. And I think what is key in the next months basically is doing a bit more research on combining all those different data sets to get to a point where we can produce a more transferable model which can be applied to more and different areas in New Zealand. And we will also continue our collaborations with universities. And I would like to thank our collaborators at the University of Canterbury, Professor Richard Green and Justin Longworth, and at the Victoria University of Wellington, Professor Mongji Zhang and Bing Shui. And yeah, we do also lots of research in 3D point clouds, but this is a completely new topic. So I better end my presentation here and thank you.
Kia ora, and thank you very much for that, Jan. That was fascinating stuff, and we've got some fascinating questions for you too. A couple of questions first about the understory. Kerry was asking if you can make assumptions about what the tree species are in the understory based on the canopy species.
Well, it might be possible for focused study areas if you know the forest type and you have additional data that you can relate it with, so you can make regression analysis. But just by looking at the top view image, you only see the trees that are in the overstory. So just, from using this technique, it's not directly possible, but you have to use other models or regression models to make that relation. But that's not what this technique is able to do just by looking at the top view imagery. If you have 3D LiDAR point clouds, which can be quite accurate, then you might be able to rasterize those to a product that can be used as inputs to those models. But it gets more complicated.
Right, and now that leads directly on to a question that Acacia has asked. Would you be able to find understory trees with LiDAR imagery? So it sounds like the answer to that could be yes. And if so, how many points per meter in the LiDAR would be required for that? Have you thought
That
about that yet?
Yes, so that very much depends on the forest type, on the tree that you want to detect, and yeah, the, just canopy density that is above that particular tree that you're interested in. So yeah, it's difficult to give a concrete number, but it's likely to be above 100 points per square meter, way above what you usually have from publicly available regional LiDAR surveys, which are usually below 20 points per square meter. Older surveys even have less than 5 points per square meter effectively. So there's yeah, so you need really high resolution LiDAR for that. But then yeah, might be you might have to switch to other types of neural networks that actually work directly on the point cloud. But it
Great.
always depends on the case.
Thanks for that, Jan. Sounds like an opportunity for more research. Here's one, a topic close to my heart because I love colour. In the 2 centimetre crown mapping, does the colour represent species, or are they just used to differentiate between the crowns?
That image that I've shown was just a random color for each tree. We do have more detailed species information for individual trees in that study area, but in general, and we also use this type of data to and match it to ground-based surveys of tree species, especially in the urban areas. But fundamentally, there's quite a yeah, it gets complicated quite quickly because the GPS points that are usually taken to map tree species often do not match up with the ground polygons from top view imagery. So it's actually a very hard problem to solve. And it again always depends on the study area and the way these measurements have been taken. So yeah, you can do it. We've done it for a few areas, but in general, it's yeah, a harder problem than it sounds like. So yeah.
Great, thanks for that. Now, something else here about the canopy. Nigel has asked us, does the presence of vines affect tree crown mapping? And has any work been done to identify vines in a tree canopy?
It complicates tree crown mapping, of course, and especially species mapping, because sometimes you yeah, detect, yeah, so it complicates a lot of things. And I have to also mention that these techniques are not perfect, not just because the techniques itself is not perfect, but in top view imagery, it's really hard even for a human to tell what is one tree, what are two trees, what is just one branch of a tall tree. So the model will try to learn sort of what we taught it. So the training labels that we generate already make assumptions what we've sort of thought is a tree, whether that vine belongs to that tree or it's something different. So yeah, it can again get quite complicated because sometimes you have a large crown polygon for a large tree with lots of branches, and sometimes it's broken up in smaller pieces. It's always a trade-off.
Great, thank you. To what extent can these sort of techniques be used to identify damage? And so we've got a question specifically about Kāori dieback, but there's also other pest damage and storms. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the great thing about this technique is that it does not rely on LiDAR surveys. So and usually taking aerial photos is much more flexible, much cheaper, and done routinely on multiple dates. So that means that you can use one model, for instance, to map all the trees as a baseline from one date. And then once you have updated aerial photography for that area, you can run your prediction over that image and look at the different results in tree predictions. You have to take that with a grain of salt, because sometimes the image might look different. So the accuracy might be different from the accuracy from the previous image. So you might end up with, usually it works really good, but sometimes there might be false predictions or false positives. So it's, that's the cool thing about this technique, that you can actually use it for, in a quite flexible way for mapping vegetation that is lost, or planted vegetation that is all of a sudden there, so new trees. So it's not always about just trees that are gone, but also some that are now there. So
yeah, that detecting change is really important for lots of our work, isn't it? Now, this is a question about accuracy, and I've lost it. Can you tell us how accurate the height and diameter is in the tree, in the online tree map for Wellington?
So the diameter, I would say, is quite accurate, because it's basically exactly what you can see in the image. So the outline of that polygon, depending whether the tree was delineated perfectly or not, the diameter will be accurate representation of for that period in time. The imagery that we used is from 2017, and unfortunately there was no LiDAR coverage for the same time period. So the LiDAR tree height estimate is from the survey that was flown 2019, early 2020. So it's 2 years later, really. So there's a bit of mismatch between the height and the actual diameter. And yeah, the accuracy in the tree height might be in the order of 10-15 centimeters, I'd say, but it's the rasterized version of the canopy, so there's a bit of uncertainty, but usually it's pretty accurate.
Great, thanks. Now I'm gonna finish up with this slightly curly question from Sam, but I think it's something that a lot of people are thinking about. Is there any relationship between this technology and remote sensing of trees for carbon stocks? Now Sam's thinking about how this can reduce compliance monitoring and costs for tree carbon accounting on farms. But perhaps let's just tackle the big question, the first big question about remote sensing and for carbon stocks.
I think, to be perfectly honest, it's just one tool in your general tool set to delineate all the tree crowns. You need much more information to actually monitor carbon stock or to calculate carbon sequestration. So you need lots more information, which may include the volume of a tree. So you need the actual LiDAR survey, for instance, or you need the actual tree species information. So you have to combine the knowledge of local knowledge of the tree species with this technique. So it's much more involved. It's a tool that can work well, but we need more information and other techniques that go in conjunction with it to actually do a proper map of carbon storage on farms, for instance.
Great. Look, we're going to wrap up there. I can see that there are more questions coming through, and so rest assured we will answer those. They will all appear on our website alongside the presentations and recordings of the whole week's webinars. We hope to get that up there live from next week. I'd like to say a big thanks to Jan and all our presenters this week for really enriching our knowledge about this important area of work. As Jan has just alluded to, it fits into a number of other areas of interest and research taking place at Manaaki Whenua. So I'm sure you'll hear more from us around remote sensing as part of other work as the year goes on. Thanks everyone for joining us, whether you came just for one session or for the whole week. We've enjoyed sharing our work with you. Thanks and bye for now.